Hi, everybody. So in this video, we're going to be talking about the third lecture related to efficiency. And all of these are about how do interventions in markets reduce efficiency in these circumstances. So we already looked at taxes. In this video, we're going to look at two things that benefit sellers: quotas and price floors. So let's get started. So we know that from the previous unit that quotas are legal restrictions on the quantity of transactions, right? It's a cap. You can either use licenses or you can say you can't sell anymore, harvest anymore, whatever. There's two purposes. One is you could reduce the quantity. Maybe there's too many transactions happening, the government believes. And the other would be you want to favor certain sellers who are able to sell under the quota. So there's two reasons why a government might impose these. Certain producers we know benefit because they are able to supply under the quota. However, other sellers are unable to supply under the product quota, and buyers who are able to pay for the product end up paying higher prices, and some buyers don't get it at all. We remember that from the last unit, the benefit that those sellers who do get to sell, we call that quota rent. It's the additional benefit that's kind of unearned by being able to transact under the quota. Now, we know that the original picture of producer and consumer surplus looks like this down below. And what we're going to do is kind of see how it changes when we draw a quota. So we're not going to graph the original producer and consumer surplus. It'll get a little too messy if we do that. But we are going to need a supply and demand graph here. So on the next slide, this is a lot of information. I'm going to show you how to construct it, and then I'm going to walk you through some of the important things on it. Now, we'll go ahead and add some dots here, and I have on there 12, so we'll just keep it consistent, and 5. And we'll say that the government comes in and puts in a quota, a maximum of 10. And we say no more, right, than 10. You're only allowed to sell 10. Now, the price that the buyers end up paying, if we remember from last unit, is on the demand curve, and it's where the quota and the demand curve intersect. And that's, we said, price 6. And again, I'm just reading this right down below. So the price the buyers pay is 6, but the cost of producing 10 of these to the sellers is not 6. The cost is defined by the supply curve, and that's only 4. So they would have been willing to do it for 4, but they actually got 6. So they got some unearned benefit as a result. Now, here's where things get a little tricky, right? The deadweight loss, hopefully you can spot that one right off the bat. That's this area. That's that area. And it's the value of the transactions that don't occur that should be happening, but they're not occurring because of the quota. So we went from 12 to 10, and the surpluses that were lost are here. So we lost some consumer surplus and we lost some producer surplus. I know that's a little hard to see. Now, for the next step, we need to know what's consumer surplus under the quota. Well, what's the price that the buyers are now paying, right? Remember that producer and consumer surplus are what's the price that you receive and what you would have been willing to do it for producer surplus. And consumer surplus is what's the benefit, the maximum that you would have been willing to pay down to the price that you actually paid. So the buyers paid 6. And so this area up here is the consumer surplus. It's the area from the demand curve down to the price the buyers paid. Well, what's the price that the sellers received? Well, they received 6. Now, you might have been tempted to say that they received 4, but there isn't a wedge between the two in this one. It's just a quota. And so the sellers are also getting 6. Sellers earn the same amount, right? They also earn 6. So down to the supply curve is producer surplus. And so all of that is producer surplus. So you can see that this area, and I'm just going to kind of lightly dash it in here a little bit, that area used to be part of the consumer surplus, and it got pushed over to now being part of the producer surplus. Remember, we said that we benefit certain producers. Well, here is the proof in the pudding, right, is that this area right here has been transformed from consumer to producer. Now, there's also something called quota rent, and it's the area up here, quota rent, and the area here, because it's actually the difference between the 6 and the 4. Quota rent is that difference between what your cost of producing it was and what you actually received as a result of the quota. And so I went ahead and put that down there as well. Okay, so hopefully this helps you. Now we're going to switch over to price floors. Now, price floors basically perform the same function, and that's why I put them together in this video. Both of these benefit certain sellers. A price floor is a legal minimum for a good or a service, and usually they use them to ensure that there's certain prices that are received by certain sellers. Now, obviously, the sellers who are able to sell under it benefit because they're able to sell at a higher price. However, other sellers are going to get left out in the cold, just like we saw with a quota. And there are buyers who are going to pay higher prices, and some of the buyers aren't going to get the product. So they have the same issues, quotas and price floors. Okay? So we're going to go ahead and draw this one. I'll switch slides here. Again, this is what it looks like before, and then you can kind of see how it transforms some of that surplus. So we need a supply and demand graph, just like before. Oh, that was kind of a wonky one, wasn't it? And we'll say that it's at 12 and 5, just to keep it nice and consistent. And we'll say that the government now says you have a price floor, you can't go below this, of 6. And so that means the buyers are going to pay, buyer pays 6, right? The buyer's going to pay that. And we'll go down here to 10, because that's the amount of demand for this product, right? We know that they're only going to have 10 sold. We know that there is going to be a surplus, right? That's the amount of the surplus. Now, that's not something that you have to have in this picture, but it is maybe useful to remember price floors create surpluses. There's also going to be deadweight loss. That's the value of the transactions that didn't happen, right? From going from 12 to 10, we lost some surplus. And now if the buyer pays 6, going up to the demand curve, you have consumer surplus, and then down from that price, because the seller earns that price, seller earns, it's the same price, they earn 6, down to the supply curve is the producer surplus. And so you can see that once again, and I'm going to switch back here, that it's transforming some of, whoops, oh my, there we go. It's transforming some of that surplus here from the consumers, which used to be blue, to the producers. So again, both of these shift some of that surplus away, and both of them result in deadweight loss. All right, so hopefully this helped you. See you next time.